Okay, so still working on day two. Still working on these ice cubes. Almost got one of these animals out. Can you use your hammer? No? You got it? What are you getting out of there, Joaquin?
Doggy.
Okay. And I see you got your apron on. What else? Your chef hat. Very good. Oh, looks like your tool came apart there. Well,
Fix it.
okay, well what we'll do is we'll check back in later with you. Let's go to the lesson now. Okay, so here we are, day two. Welcome. Thank you everyone for the feedback that you gave on the lesson from yesterday. Looks like most of you were able to complete it. Some of you completed it ahead of time, and I appreciate that. So remember, a few key points, same points as yesterday. Be safe, be healthy right now. We know that the situation continues to get worse and worse out there, so please stay home. If you do need to go out, make sure it's for something really, really, really important. Stay 6 feet away from people. When you get back in, wash your hands. Don't touch your face. When you are able to check in for school, make sure you check Google Classroom every day. There'll be videos, there'll be announcements, there'll be tasks, homework, assessments, etc. Every day there'll be something for you to check. And also you need to make sure to check in so that you can be marked for the attendance for each day. We understand that this is still new. There's still going to be some adjustment to be made, and I'll be adjusting as necessary, and I hope that you're flexible as well. Please ask lots of questions. Many of you already asked clarifying questions on Google Classroom. That was very helpful for us to get through the first day together. Be patient. Please trust us as long as you're doing your best. You're checking in every day. You're trying to complete the assignments every day. Your grade will be fine, and you will be continuing to learn. So let's get back to the lesson. So we're continuing World War II. This is the next lesson in this unit. Homework-wise, the homework is the same as it was yesterday. You need to make up the interwar period quiz if you were absent on Friday, March 13th. Many of you have already done that. Thank you. And you have a guided reading to do through Google Drive. Many of you have also completed that as well. So if you haven't done the Castle Learning Makeup Quiz yet, you're going to do it here. And if you haven't started the guided reading homework yet, the old version looked like this on paper. The new version is going to look like this. It's a Google Doc. The questions are the same. You'll just type your responses into the document, and then you'll submit it, and it'll be checked the same way as it would have been if you were turning in the paper version. It's due on Friday. Turn it in by Friday. Just don't turn it in late. And our aim for today, we're looking at the next battle that occurs during World War II. France had already been conquered, and Nazi Germany now took on Great Britain, and we'll find out from the aim you can tell why was Nazi Germany unable to defeat Great Britain so quickly. There's Great Britain highlighted there, despite conquering France so quickly. There's Nazi Germany highlighted there. So you already know that Great Britain is not defeated, but the question we need to look at is why. And part of it has to do with what you see, the images there, the British Royal Air Force versus the Nazi German Luftwaffe, which is the name of their Air Force. So we'll find out today how things went between those two opposing forces. So for our warm-up question, we want you to think of this scenario. Hurry, a meteor shower is raining down on New York City and destroying everything in its path. And maybe you hear a sound like this. All right, so for many of you, if you live in Williamsburg or if you spend time on Friday afternoon in Williamsburg, you've heard that before, used by members of the Jewish committee as a call to basically their Friday night they all go inside and have time of sort of being with family, etc., and not going outside. So many of you have heard that before, but originally that sound is an air raid siren. So you'll hear that sound again throughout this lesson, and this is what people might hear if, say, a meteor shower or an attack from the air was coming. You might hear a sound like that. So what would you do to survive? Where could you go? How can you protect yourself? Think quickly. This is something you would want to think about if it's happening like right now. Oh no, what can I do to survive? So think about it, think about it. You're thinking about it. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? If you haven't thought of anything, maybe it's too late. Here are some sample responses that students have come up with in the past. First thing many people will say is if there's something coming from above and it's going to hit my apartment building that I live in, maybe I will go hide in the basement of my apartment building. So that's certainly one option. Better than just hanging out above ground. Another option sometimes people come up with is they'll remember, oh, I've noticed or I've seen around the city or maybe the building you live in, or if you're at school, sometimes schools will have signs that say they are a bomb or a fallout shelter. This goes back to the Cold War, which we're going to get to in our next unit. But there are places around that are designed for people to go down into a basement to hide in the event of something like this. So sometimes students think of that. Another option is if you are out and about in public, maybe you need to get underground, you run to the nearest subway station, hide underground, and stay there as long as you need to. Certainly safer than being above ground. Some people say, well, if I have time, I'll just try to get out of the city. And certainly that would be an option if you had time and if you knew where the meteor shower was going to hit exactly. And then, of course, the last one, there's always some students who say, I would just give up and embrace it. So maybe that's you. Maybe that's what you came up with. All right, so let's go back to the map from yesterday. So we're going to add on to this some of the events that have already occurred. So we've been talking about Nazi Germany. Before the war, they had already formed an alliance with Italy, which was also a country led by a fascist dictator, Mussolini. So Hitler and Mussolini were both fascists, and they were the leaders of their respective countries. Hitler led Germany, Mussolini led Italy. They were both fascists, so it made sense for them to form an alliance. Then Germany, of course, they had already conquered Poland. Then when things really took off in World War II, they set out to conquer all of these countries: Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium. They conquered Luxembourg, and of course they went through those countries to get to France to defeat France. So for Germany, the next country on their list is the only country that's left that had declared war on them, which is going to be Great Britain. So they're going to try to get to Great Britain. As we had talked about yesterday, though, if they tried to do what's called an amphibious invasion, going from the water, because there's a channel of water between Great Britain and France called the English Channel. If the Germans were to try to go from the water on boat and land, it is an incredibly difficult maneuver. There are very few successful amphibious invasions, meaning going from the water to the land. They often are a total disaster, and so that is not going to be an option in this case. So what they are going to try to do is they're going to try to first attack Britain from the air, flying across the channel, flying over Britain, and dropping bombs on Great Britain, basically to destroy as much of it as they can so that Great Britain will give up and Nazi Germany will have defeated both France and Great Britain. So we're going to see today how that goes. So with the fall of France, Great Britain stood alone against the Nazis. They were the only ones left trying to fight against them. Winston Churchill, you need to know his name. He's the leader of Great Britain during this time. He's the prime minister, which is kind of the same as being president of the United States. He was a very, very well-known public speaker, gave a lot of speeches. And the speech he gave about this war that was coming is that we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields, and in the streets we shall never surrender. So he was responsible for really keeping the people and the military of Great Britain really motivated to fight against the Germans. So, in the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe, which is Germany's air force, began flying across the English Channel to bomb Great Britain. At first, they targeted British airfields, which is where they would have had their airplanes parked, aircraft factories, which would have been making airplanes for the British. And then, after attacking those facilities, they began focusing on cities in Great Britain in order to try to break British morale. If they could get the British citizens to feel like we should just give up, give in to Germany, give them what they want so they stop bombing us, then the Germans felt like this would be the best strategy, right? So they bombed major cities, including London. It was incredibly destructive, destroyed lots of buildings in the city, lots of homes in the city, etc. So what did people do? As you might have thought for the warm up, many of them, when they would hear the air raid sirens, would go underground at sunset because the attacks would come at night so that the planes were harder to see. They would go underground and they would live in the subway stations. You can see in this photo, they had put together some hammocks across the tracks, right? So people would live underground at night if they could get to an underground shelter. In some cases, they built additional air raid shelters or they used basements. And this was effective in some cases in order to survive, and people tried to live their life as best they could. In other cases, though, the bombs could even still reach through. So in this photo, a bomb penetrated the road, exploded in an underground station, which killed 68 people, and then a bus was driving through the blackout conditions because they had all the lights off at night so that the Germans couldn't see where the cities were, hopefully couldn't see where the cities were, so they would not be able to bomb as effectively. And so the bus then basically smashed into the crater that had been left by this bomb exploding. So hiding underground was a good strategy, but even then, people could be at risk of being killed in these attacks. People who could not get to an underground shelter often would put this type of a shelter in their backyard. It's called an Anderson shelter. So basically, in their backyard area, or what's called their garden, they would put one of these. It's a little bit sunk under the ground, sunk into the dirt, and it might not look like it's very effective, but in this photo, you can see the house that these people had is completely destroyed. And the bomb fell on the house, totally destroyed it, but the three people that were sleeping at night inside the shelter were not hurt. So in some cases, this was a way to survive, even though it was certainly not the ideal situation. In this photo, workers are removing rubble from a building, and if you look towards the left of the photo and you look at the building that's still there, its windows were all blown out. But you can also see even there's still wallpaper on the side of that building from when the building collapsed. It left like part of it up there. And you can see this is a photo here of a boy pointing up to a similar situation, like that's where my bedroom used to be. You can see his house totally destroyed by a bomb. Many children were made homeless because of the bombing that was taking place by the Germans on Great Britain, on the cities and such. So some children, if they could, were sent out of cities like London, and they were sent to live out in the countryside. And they were sent out there because it was seen as that they would hopefully be safer out in the countryside than they would if they were in the cities. And so people would open up their homes to welcoming children there. And actually, that's the basis for the starting point for the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is one of the Chronicles of Narnia. So if you're familiar with that story at all, the four children are, in the beginning, sent from the city to the countryside to live with the professor. And it's in his house that they go on this magical journey through the wardrobe and into the land of Narnia. So if you're familiar with that book, that's just a connection for you to make to it. So lots and lots of destruction throughout Great Britain in the cities during this time period. But despite the destruction and loss of life, the British did not give up. During the day, people tried their best to live their lives as normal. So in this photo, you can see office workers making their way to work through all of the debris after a heavy raid the night before. Here are women going back to their house that had been destroyed, and they're salvaging the possessions that they could. So really, very, very difficult time. House is destroyed, but happy to recover whatever they could from their house in order to keep spirits up throughout that time. In terms of defense, there were searchlights placed throughout the cities, and there were anti-aircraft guns placed throughout the cities. And these were in, like you can see in this one, it says in anti-aircraft gun in Hyde Park, London. That would be as if this type of weapon was in Central Park or McCarran Park, and you're just walking along through the park, and they have these type of guns and these type of searchlights set up, because every resource they could use was dedicated towards the war effort. Some new technology also helped. An electronic tracking system known as radar helped turn the tide in Great Britain's favor. This was developed in the 1930s, and radar could be used to tell the number, speed, and direction of incoming warplanes. I'll show you a diagram, we'll go back to the map in a moment to show you how that worked. Another tool they had this device called Enigma, a German code-making machine named Enigma that had been smuggled into Great Britain in the late 1930s. Enigma enabled the British to decode secret German messages. So they could use the radar to tell when planes were coming, and they could decode their messages that they were sending, so they could use that to also try to figure out when they were coming. So let's go back to the map for a second. So we've added to the map some radar, and the Germans would be detected by radar when their planes approached, their aircraft approached, and the radar would, set off an alarm to the British defense that they should then attack back and send in their aircraft to fight off the German airplanes to defend Great Britain. So, with the information gathered by those devices, Britain's Royal Air Force flyers could quickly launch attacks on the enemy. Stunned by British resistance, Hitler decided to call off his attack. So the British proved for the first time that even though Hitler had done a lot of destruction and conquered almost all of Western Europe very quickly, he was not invincible. He could be stopped, and this would prove to be very, very important going forward when the Allies make their attempts to start pushing him back out of Western Europe and defeat the Germans ultimately. Here's our vocabulary. Vocabulary similar to yesterday. Yesterday was Battle of France. Today is Battle of Britain. It's also known as the London Blitz. Blitz is short for Blitzkrieg. They were blitzing London with the aerial attacks. It's a military campaign during World War II. The Royal Air Force of Great Britain successfully defended Great Britain against large-scale attacks by the German Air Force, which was called the Luftwaffe. And this lasted for almost an entire year. Almost an entire year of people having to go down to the subway to sleep in an Anderson shelter in their backyard, walk through debris and rubble in the streets on their way to work. It was a very, very difficult time, but they did get through it. So what you're going to read about for the task today, there are 3 different stories that you can read. You're going to read at least one of the stories. So you decide which of the 3 survivor stories you want to read. There's one story, someone who lived in a subway station. Another one, someone who was separated from their twin brother during the bombing. Someone who was responsible for saving a family that was in one of those Anderson shelters that you saw. And then after you've read at least one of the 3, you're going to also read this section called Darker Side of the Blitz. So pick one of the 3, and then everyone reads the darker side of the Blitz. So you can also see some of the other side, some of the negative things that were going on during this time period. Your writing task is going to be to write a first-hand account. So this goes back to we did something like this when we were learning about the domestic system in Europe before the Industrial Revolution, and you wrote about the day in the life of someone who worked at home making goods at home by hand. And so today you're going to write a first-hand account of a day in the life of someone who survived the Battle of Britain, also known as the London Blitz. Consider how your night might begin, challenges you may face, your relationship with your family, etc. You may want to start your entry as follows. I heard the air raid siren and... So, consider the following questions in your response as you write this paragraph. Where do you sleep at night? Are you responsible for taking care of anyone else? What is difficult or challenging about your daily routine and your nightly routine? And then lastly, make sure to include something about the war. Are you optimistic about the war? Meaning, do you feel like Britain will be successful? Are you feeling down? Are you feeling negative about it? Do you think it's not going to work out, that Britain should just give up? Try to put yourself in the perspective of that time period where you're answering this, right? We can look back and say, well, we know Britain was successful, but it was an entire year. Think about you're going through this for an entire year. How would you feel? Would you feel like this is worth it? Would you feel like it's not worth it? Okay. Finishing out, as we started with, we'll end with this. Don't forget, be safe, be healthy, stay inside, take care of each other, wash your hands, don't touch your face, check in every day. This way you can keep up with the assignments, and this way you can also be marked present for class. We understand that this is new. Ask any questions that you need to. Please trust us. As long as you're doing your best to keep up, as long as you can show us that you're learning, grade will be fine ultimately. So thank you, and we will check back in with Joaquin, see what he's up to, and then I will see you guys tomorrow. Okay, we're checking back in. What'd you find?
I got one of my cat medicine.
You're chewing on a cat medicine right now? Okay. And what did you find in that block of ice?
A dog.
Very good. Did it take a long time to get him out?
20.
20? And how, what did you use to get him out?
A hammer.
Okay. What else?
Food coloring.
Yeah. And some...
Soft food coloring.
Very good.
Food coloring.
All right. Anything else you want to say to the students?
Hello.
I think we're all done, so we'll say...
Bye-bye. Hello.
Bye. See you tomorrow.